Good afternoon. Welcome to another NASSP webinar. My name is John Norai, and I'll be your moderator for today. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, please use this toll-free number, 1-888-799-9666, extension 2, and be sure to jot down the webinar ID number 760-344-656 so that you'll have that to refer to when someone answers. If you're tweeting, please use hashtag NASSP webinar, and know that not only is NASSP on Facebook, but that our website is where you can go to get a recording of the webinar in about 24 hours after today's presentation. And that recording, of course, includes all the slides. So we always get someone who asks, how can I get the slides? And the answer is, it's on the website. You can go there for it. You can also go there to get a certificate of attendance. NASSP.org/webinar completed is where you'll find that. Again, I'm John Norai, and I'd like to introduce our presenters today. We are very fortunate to have three staff members from the Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO. Kaylin Connolly is the Program Manager for Educator and Student Expectations. James Paul is the Program Associate for Student Expectations. And Rosalind Rice-Harris is the Program Director for School Improvement. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the content of today's webinar over to Kaylin.
Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today to talk about some work that we have underway at CCSSO to better support states in supporting principals to establish and cultivate inclusive learning environments for the success of each and every child, with a particular focus on students with disabilities. We have our agenda for today up here on the screen. We'll start by providing the introductions that John just did. Thank you, John, for those intros. And then want to highlight and share about CCSSO's National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership, a diverse alliance of about 20 organizations that have been working together over the past year to develop some guidance for states in order to better support their school leaders, principals, and school leaders to establish inclusive principal leadership. We'll talk about just a little bit about where we've been in that work to date, how it was developed by the National Collaborative, where we are now, and then where we're going next in supporting a cohort of about 5 states to go deep and integrate inclusive principal leadership in policy and practice. And then we'll close out by inviting any questions you all may have on the resource itself and the supports to states that we have planned, and also have some discussion questions. I just want to note that we very much welcome your feedback on the resource that we'll share itself. And if you are logged in on your computer, we encourage you all to pull it up on the screen and reference it as we go through today's webinar. We really want to hear from you on its usefulness and relevance to you all in your work as we continue our supports to states around this topic. Next. So we have 3 main objectives for our time together today. Again, we want to share the resource that was developed in partnership with the National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership, supporting inclusive schools for the success of each child, a guide for states on principal leadership. And James, thank you for sharing the link in the chat. The URL is ccsso-inclusiveprinciples.guide.org. So please feel free to follow along as we go through today's webinar. And we'll also highlight a subset of the 8 strategies included in the guide for integrating inclusive principal leadership in policy and practice that we thought would be of most interest and relevance to you all as school leaders, and wanted to share just a few sample resources to better support you in your work in establishing inclusive learning environments for for the success of students with disabilities and other students who may struggle to learn in school. And then invite your feedback around how we can improve this resource for school level and policy leaders. Next slide. And with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Rosalind, who we are glad to partner with today on this webinar to talk a little bit about how this work is grounded in the Council's broader strategic supports to states and specifically states' commitments around equity.
Thank you, Kaylin. So one of the cornerstones of the work that we've been focusing on here at CCSSO is to support states in leading for equity. As you all know, equity is the foundation and the key driver for our work in schools. We are all here to provide high quality school experiences for each and every child, and especially to increase the outcomes for all of our students, with a special focus on our students who are attending low performing or struggling schools, or may belong to student groups that have a trajectory of lower performance than our mainstream groups. So in looking at the work that we've initiated regarding equity, we can tell you where we've been. So we've started our work almost 2 years ago with the Aspen Institute to create and release a document, Leading for Equity, which encompasses our 10 equity commitments to support our state education chiefs in taking action to achieve educational equity. So ensuring that each and every kid has high quality learning experiences, and that we are taking action at the state level to support districts and schools in closing the achievement and opportunity gaps for our traditionally underserved populations. So thinking about that, we were able to define as an organization what educational equity meant to us, and it means to us that every student has access to the resources and educational rigor that they need, and it's at the right place, at the right moment in their education, and that goes across identifiers, so across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, family background, and or income, meaning that we are all committed to ensuring that every student has a high quality educational experience, regardless of what their background is and what whom they identify with groups, as well as where they live. That all those identifiers are not limiting for students, that we use all of those identifiers as strengths in order to effectively access what students need in order for them to achieve. Next slide. So this slide goes back to Kaylin to share about our inclusive principal leadership, sharing with you all where we've been in the process, so you can have more context into the importance of inclusive principal leadership in leading schools.
Thanks, Rosalind. So the professional standards for educational leaders are and have been really foundational to our work on strengthening supports for school leaders at the Council. And our inclusive principal leadership work is very much grounded in and builds from the PSEL. In 2015, we worked collaboratively with the National Policy Board for Educational Administration to update the professional standards for educational leaders. So these standards can refresh the Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium standards, or the ISLIC, and really emphasize the principal's role not only as building manager, but also as instructional leader. And we believe in the supports that principals need in order to support each and every learner to be successful in school, including students with disabilities. And when principals create safe, supportive learning environments, students who may struggle to learn in school are really able to thrive. And so as a supplement to the PSEL, last year, we, along with our partners at the CEDAR Center, or the Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform Center, released the supplementary guidance document, PSEL 2015, and promoting principal leadership for the success of students with disabilities. And this is not meant to be something separate from the PSEL, but really as a supplementary guidance document, outlining or highlighting those aspects of the standards that are particularly relevant for supporting principals to lead effective, inclusive learning environments where each child is able to thrive, and to better support their students with disabilities through both high expectations and appropriate services and supports, and can be used to support both the preparation and ongoing principal professional learning around strengthening supports for students with disabilities. Next slide. After releasing the document, we didn't want to just stop at the release and dissemination of the document itself, and so CCSSO held, in collaboration with the CEDAR Center and the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, a collaborative meeting of about 32 individuals representing national organizations, the principal associations, and various technical assistance centers responsible for supporting states, districts, and schools to discuss the critical role of school principals in strengthening supports for students with disabilities. And at that meeting, each organization made specific commitments for how they'll better support inclusive principal leadership in policy and practice. So in order to sustain and build upon that collective work, we launched the National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership to strengthen supports for states' efforts on advancing this work in principal preparation and ongoing principal professional learning and development. The National Collaborative is a diverse alliance that includes the following principal associations, including our partners, NASSP, member organizations, technical assistance centers, researchers, educator preparation programs, both traditional and alternative certification programs, as well as nonprofits. And we, in follow-up, next slide, just this past May, after a year of convening and working collaboratively with our partners via the National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership, we released the online guidance Supporting Inclusive Schools for the Success of Each Child, a microsite that provides 8 state strategies and accompanying resources to support states in integrating inclusive principal leadership in policy and practice. The link to the site is up on the screen. The URL is also in the chat box. Thanks, James, for sharing that. And it's CCSSO inclusiveprincipalsguide.org. So please feel free to pull it up if you have access to your computer and follow along. We'll spend the next portion of the session highlighting aspects of the online guide. Next slide. So these 8 strategies were identified by leaders in the field of special education and inclusive education, and more broadly strengthening supports for principals, and represent kind of their collected knowledge on how to ensure and better support principal development to establish inclusive and equitable learning environments for students with disabilities, and indeed each and every child. And I won't read through all of these 8 strategies, but did want to focus on one that we thought would be kind of most useful and relevant to you and your work, which is strategy 4 around promoting principal development on inclusive practices. Next slide. So strategy 4 has or contains a variety of suggested actions that states can take to effectively develop inclusive principal leadership practices and better support their principals through in-service supports. For instance, to develop inclusive leadership practices, state education agencies can provide, promote, and evaluate the efficacy of principals in-service supports, evaluation and feedback systems, and ongoing professional learning or professional development opportunities at both the state and the local levels, and ensure that all learners, all school leaders and principals in particular have the supports they need to identify evidence-based and high-leverage practices among their teachers across general and special education to really advance positive outcomes for students with disabilities and promote teacher development and instructional leadership toward that end. Next slide. In addition to the various strategies, there are just a wealth of resources available and associated with each of the 4. And 2 that we wanted to highlight today aligned to promoting principal development on inclusive practices come through our partners at the IRIS Center as well as CAST. So the IRIS resource site is an incredible resource to support principal development around leading inclusive, really building and cultivating inclusive school cultures. And the Universal Design for Learning, guidelines are also really helpful toward that end. And I wanted to turn it back over to Rosalind to share a little bit about, from her perspective as a former school leader and just the connection to school improvement more broadly, share a little bit about her perspective on the usefulness or relevance of these resources.
Thanks, Kaylin. So looking at the IRIS resource site, creating an inclusive school environment module, I found that to be very useful as a former school leader and a school leader in a high-needs school for several years. I found that the populations that I had to work and adapt to serve were especially my special needs populations, to ensure that they were learning in a psychologically and emotionally safe environment, that my teachers were supported effectively, and that we were able to clearly articulate and translate the needs of our students using resources in which to ground practice for our teachers and to develop the learning environment for the teachers and students. So using the IRIS resource, I saw that it's very helpful in leading the conversation and initiating that conversation around creating a very strong environment for our students to learn how to effectively incorporate both interventions and on-grade level content in a way that is effective for students. It also provided ideas and many ways that teachers can utilize their time with cooperative planning, being able to leverage additional special educators and specialists, as well as leveraging the expertise of school leadership in order to provide really strong classroom experiences for the students, as well as being able to use this resource to create professional development opportunities for teachers in order to teach past the IEP, and while utilizing the base level needs that are described in the IEP, really ensuring that instruction touches on the rigorous essentials for students and ensuring that they're still able to access and be successful with grade level content. Also looking at the Universal Design Guidelines, the UDL guidelines, that is a wonderful resource to share with teachers to support them in planning, in utilizing personalized learning ideas, utilizing technology in order to provide students a very customized learning experience that we find that many of our students, not just our students with special needs, thrive with. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Rosalind. And with that, I'll turn it over to James to talk a little bit about where we're going next with this work.
Thanks, Kaylin. So as former educators, as Kaylin and I both are, and Rosalind as a former educator and school leader, we know how important it is to providing short and longer term support that is focused on developing school principals who are well prepared and supported to lead inclusive environments that meet the needs of students with disabilities. So our hope is in our work here at the Council of Chief State School Officers and in partnership with the National Association of Secondary School Principals is to support states and therefore local districts in building upon, deepening, and refining current work on school leadership to make sure that there's a greater focus on inclusive leadership practices. I've shared a lot of the resources that we have within the website. I encourage you to look at them all and see about their usability for you and in your context. If you are interested in learning more, please contact me. My email address is available there on the screen. It's james.paul@ccsso.org. Next slide, please. So we wanted to make sure that we left time for you all, our great attendees, and thank you so much for logging on. And just wondered what questions or comments that you have. We also have a set of where to start reflection questions that are available online on the microsite, and have several reflection questions up there on that slide. So would like to open it up to you all. Rosalind, Kaylin, and myself are happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have.
At this time, I don't have any questions coming in from the audience, but a couple of things occur. One is, what professional learning opportunities are the most helpful to me as a school leader in increasing my school's inclusivity?
So I would definitely engage in the two resources that we shared earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. That would be a definite start in beginning to shape your understanding and beginning to attach learning to new learning to some things that you're already doing, and using that resource, especially the first resource, as a gauge to where you are in building understanding capacity within your school with your teachers around the making inclusive practices, the use of inclusive practices and inclusive leadership at the classroom and school level a priority. Where do you lie in understanding of that, the capacity of that, the practice of that? And then looking based upon that understanding, honestly, the first place I would look at the school leader is to my special education team at the school level or at the district, and share with them this resource. And if professional learning does not exist yet, that is a wonderful place for you to look at with your team what your desired state of implementation is, and based upon your assessment, what is your current state, and then building a learning plan for yourself and your team from there. In addition to that, there are numerous organizations that you would be able to tap into that would provide information on how to best serve our students with disabilities. That would include NASSP, ASCD. There's also a lot of work at the superintendent's level, at the district level, looking at AASA regarding supporting the leadership and supporting students with special needs. So definitely reach out to your organizations. But honestly, the best place to start is with that self-assessment, using those documents, and then building that learning plan from there.
And just to clarify, where do I find the self-assessment?
So if you look at if you go a few slides back to the resource we shared,
it's the IRS
I believe
resource.
It's slide 16.
It's the IRS resource.
The IRS resource,
Yeah.
yes. So that module is created with a series of guiding questions, and as well as levels. So you can use it as a self-assessment in order to gauge where you are in the implementation of an inclusive school environment. So it's not necessarily named as self-assessment, but you can use it as such.
I thank you. I appreciate that. Anything from anyone else? Let me check one more time for questions, see if anything's come in from the audience. Not there. There is one other question that I had made note of, and that's, I think the problem often for folks is, what are the specific actions I take to get started? And I think you've answered some of that, but is there anybody who can, if I were a brand new school leader and I came to you and said, help me get started on this inclusivity business, where do I start? What are some of the first steps you'd advise me to take?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, John. This is James. I think one of the things that's really important is to really have an open communication with all of your teachers that says that first and foremost that students with disabilities and any groups of students are general education students first, and ensuring that they have access as much as possible with the necessary and legal requirements for differentiated education under their individualized education programs, but making sure that first and foremost that those students have access to the general education curriculum, and that communication is shared from the principal level, and is a shared belief from the special education department to general education teachers throughout the staff. I think that's a really good place to start, is using your leadership to make sure that that's a communicated message, and then thinking about from there, how do you create structures and supports that enable students to access the general education curriculum in the least restrictive environment possible. And I know that is an incredibly difficult thing to do, but I think that in order to promote that idea of educational equity that we say, with the right educational resources at the right moment in a child's education. And I think about this a lot, about the students that I taught and the students across the country, especially students with disabilities. We need to make sure that they're getting the right resources at the right moment. And that starts with a clear communication from leadership that students are first and foremost general education students.
Thank you. That's a great advice. Yes.
And
Go.
this is Rosalind. I also wanted to add that looking at our teachers as well, that we have, with your special educators, you have teachers with specific expertise. And going back to that vein of equity, it's also working to elevate that expertise, and that much of the pedagogy that our special educators possess, that pedagogy works well for all kids, not just our students with learning disabilities, that these practices can elevate the experiences for every kid. And moving from these kids belong to these teachers to that all of our kids belong to all of our teachers, and our special educators are the specialists to support you in connecting that content, process, and product for the students to be successful. And they have a keen understanding of what pedagogical moves that can be employed within the classroom to ensure that all of our students are achieving. So really accessing those special educators as the experts that they are and elevating their practice and expertise, I think, can be another way our new administrators can walk into buildings and place inclusive leadership and inclusive practices as a priority.
Thank you very much. That's a great note on which to end. I'd like to thank all three of you for your presentation today, and thanks CCSSO for working with partner organizations such as NASSP to make this a reality. And I'd like to invite those in the audience to attend an opportunity that every school leader should take advantage of. NASSP's National Principals Conference will be this summer, July 18th through 20th. In Boston, Massachusetts. I'd like to invite all of you to be there. Thank you again for being with us. And I just see one question's come in here. Oh, just a thank you from someone in the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you all again. And with that, I will end the webinar for today.
Thank you.